making based on conclusions from policy analysis, that is evidence synthesis. And the fourth stage is implementing a course of policy action based on evidence synthesis and decision. And the last is evaluating the policy impact. So they're always necessary to evaluate policy impact for a correct course of policy action. So the first one, setting policy agenda, how to set policy agenda. Identify a problem, examine evidence, synthesize evidence, make conclusions, and implement policy. The first step is setting policy agenda. Public policy is set in the realm of system of laws, regulatory measures, and courses of action, and funding priorities concerning a given action or promulgated by a government entity or its representative. I will hold on for a moment because there is some noise. Okay. Public policy plays a crucial role in forming the guidelines and principles of society. So they are a necessary part of governing and politics. Public policy is formed as a collective effort between governments, institutions, and even citizens, the population. There are many different frameworks for understanding public policy for evidence-based assessment of policy options. The most important is evidence-based assessment and synthesis of in making policy recommendation, ultimately deciding a policy action. Therefore, stakeholder consultation is the key to successful policy making and implementation. In agenda setting in the policy process, the policy cycle starts with government paying serious attention to an issue, a policy issue, or a problem. Why does government pay attention to some issues and not others? I'll hold on for a minute. The focus at this stage of policy cycle in agenda setting is the process is on the problem. Stage of the process is on the definition of the problem, identification of the problem, and definition of the problem. There are two types of agenda in policy action. Broadly, these are broadly, there could be other types of agenda, but broad classification of policy agendas. One is the institutional agenda, the institutional, government, and official agenda of policy action. These are those that government acts on, which are institutional and agenda, deal with problems that legislators or public officials feel important and obliged to take appropriate action and measures, policy actions. There are numerous policy actions based on legislative measures or government order on various aspects of government implementation, government functioning. The second is systematic non-institutional agenda, those on which action is often delayed because they require large amount of evidence synthesis. Systematic agenda are the set of issues that the political community see as meriting attention by the public. So this is not only political communities, but also other stakeholders, possibly policy advocates, researchers, scientists, and many other stakeholders. They may all be involved in kind of advocating a policy, which is called a systemic or non-institutional agenda or policy action, which may be very important for the larger good of the society, population. In terms of models of policy process, there are two models. One is pluralistic model and the second is elitistic models. Pluralistic models of policy, they argue that policymakers have to determine the institutional agenda in response to widespread popular demand, more concerned with how policy concerns reach the agenda. This is pluralistic model that tries to take everyone into decision making and everyone targets policy that will equally affect everyone. The second is elitistic model. Elitistic model argues.
دكتور الحبيب عمل سمحتي
قسم العلاقات الدولية صح؟
قسم شؤون الدولة.
دكتور الحبيب يا ريت mute. Yes, you can speak now, Dr. Arif Ismail.
Yeah. The elitistic model argues that those situated at the top of political and economic hierarchies set the institutional agenda. Yes. What are the types of policy? There are broadly three major types of policy in public policy, in government policy making, but it could also apply to other organizational policy types, policy making. The first is regulatory policy. Regulatory policies are those that impose limit on the behavior of population, some identifiable group of population or individual. It reduces the freedom or discretion to act or not to act. Usually the result of conflict between two or more population groups. There are all clearly identifiable winners and losers. So this regulatory policy carries punitive sanctions, punitive measures, for example, regulation of criminal activity, business activity, access to public goods, gun control, consumer protection, food regulation, etc., drug regulation, etc. These are regulatory policy types, regulatory policy action and measures. The second type of policy measures are distributive policy measures, distributive policy actions, which are policies that benefit some people, but not discernible cost to others. It should be equally benefit others, but it should not disproportionately affect others or disproportionately benefit some group of population. Distributive policy action allocates government benefits to individuals or groups of people, uses of public funds, a budget, little direct competition or challenges from other groups, no direct cost to any identifiable groups, clear winners but no clear losers in this type of distributive policies. Example, subsidies, government-sponsored research, investment on development, river improvement, infrastructure development, etc. These fall under the category of distributive policy types. The third is redistributive policy. This is a realm of policy where polity that makes a deliberate reallocation of resources among identifiable social groups. There are clearly identifiable winners and losers. Power is redistributed or redivided between haves and have-nots because certain groups have been deprived or affected. So this largely talks about how to address inequalities in terms of benefits, program benefits, different groups of population. Difficult to enact because of strong opposition from potential losers. So if a policy redistributive policy action is planned, there is always opposition to that redistributive policy action because other things may not get the benefit of this policy. So because it alters the status quo, people don't want to change the status quo. Example include welfare policies, housing subsidies, progressive income tax, social security, medical aid, and many other policies which are largely redistributive policies. So this is broad categories of policy types in public policy, in government policy. But organizational policy could be similar or they could have more policy types. The next is instrument of public policy. There are several instruments of public policy. These are the instruments through which policy action is implemented, whether it is distributive policy, redistributive policy, or directive policy. All of these policies, there are instruments of public policy. So even in organizational policy, there are instruments of organizational policy. What are the instruments of public policy? Law is an important and unique source of public policy to regulate economic and social conditions. There's a lot of details that go into this instrument of policy, implementing law, law as a tool, as an instrument of policy. For every action, for every regulatory activity, you need law action, policy action in terms of the instrument of law. Second is services. Government provides different services. We all range of services directly to the population, citizens. They range from educational services at different levels, healthcare services, public amenities, infrastructure amenities, a lot of other services. This is an instrument of public policy. But always there should be a policy action to provide these services as an instrument of policy. Third is providing money, directly transferring money as a measure of policy instrument. These include social security and other benefit transfers. In today's governance and government policy making, you can see numerous social security and welfare benefit transfers. Every government, everywhere, globally, this is a common phenomenon. The numerous social security and social welfare benefits transfer programs, which is direct money transfer program or subsidy program. The fourth instrument of policy is government giveth and taketh away. So government can allocate budget, can provide money to different programs and schemes. That is what the government giveth. And what the government taketh is taxes. So periodically, every budget, government alters taxes or tax laws or alters tax regimes. They tax more or they tax less, they reduce certain tax, they increase certain tax. So tax is an important instrument of public policy. The next instrument of policy is economic instruments. It is through economic instrument that government provides waivers, budget bailouts, etc. This is beyond the regular money transfer or service provision. These are particular economic instrument that provides waivers or budgetary bailouts or other larger grants. The last instrument of public policy are research and development. So in recent time, research and development innovation is being frequently used as a policy instrument. Almost that is where evidence synthesis, evidence-based analysis and evidence synthesis in every aspect of policy making is very important. But research and development innovation is critical as a policy instrument in today's policy making, because a lot of policy action today is based on research and innovation, research and development innovation. Now this table provides a kind of framework when you have a particular instrument, what are the criteria that we are looking at in deciding a utility of an instrument and in deciding a final policy action. For example, if you take a particular instrument, regulation and standards, which are law. So when government wants to implement a new law, that law may be relating to any regulation. It could be a tax regulation, it could be any other regulation. So what generally in implementing and deciding this instrument as a policy action through this instrument, there are several things that the government or the research community or policy analysts need to consider. The first is environmental effectiveness in implementing a policy in today's relevance for environmental factors.